Alteronce Gumby is a contemporary abstract artist known for his vivid interstellar paintings that emerge from his profound fascination with the cosmos and theories of energy. His prismatic feels add new perspectives to the history of abstract painting by proposing deliberate connections between color, society, and the universe. After earning his BFA at Hunter College in New York City, Alteronce received an MFA in painting and printmaking from the Yale School of Art, where he was awarded the Robert Reed Memorial Scholarship. Perhaps best known for his layered monochromes, Alteronce's paintings focus on the presentation of the self and subvert the traditional understanding of light and color through nuanced application of tonal changes directly with his hands. His current exhibition, The Color of Everything, opened on September 9th at Nicola Vassal Gallery in New York City. I'd like to welcome Alteronce Gumby to today's open air conversation. So I guess just to set the groundwork here, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from my studio in the Bronx, New York.
Talk to us a little bit about what you've been up to this summer. I mean, I know it's been a busy one for you, and I have a bunch of questions I like to run your way, but why don't we just kind of talk about the here and now? What have you been up to the past several months?
Past several months. Well, I guess at the beginning of the summer, I was returning from Japan doing a exhibition that was at Koki Arts, which you yourself curated. And that was a very wonderful experience. It's the first time I've been to Japan, first time I've been to Asia, really. And so this was a very eye-opening and kind of a culture shock experience. And since then, I came back very much inspired. There was a few moments that happened during that trip that kind of inspired the work behind my current exhibition at Nicola Vassal Gallery. And yeah, so I've just been in the studio kind of making work all summer, working towards the exhibition. Made a few trips to, actually I made a trip to Arkansas to mine some quartz at Avant Mines down there in Arkansas, which was a very great experience. It's the first time I've ever been to a mine to actually mine the gemstones myself. So it was a very great experience. It's something I look forward to doing in the future.
So let's talk about your work with a bit of specificity. You mentioned going to a mine and mining quartz. So for those who don't know, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the work that you do in terms of the materials that you use and some of the processes that you go through to create your paintings.
Yes, so the materials that I'm currently using are acrylic paint, glass, gemstones, and within this exhibition, I'm really introducing resin as a major medium that I'm exploring at the current moment.
And how did you arrive at these materials? You know, nothing happens overnight, and I've known of your work for several years, and I've seen it evolve over the course of the past, say, 5 or 6 years. So can you take us through the kind of work you were doing, say, 5 or 6 years ago, and how that transitioned into the work that you're doing now?
Sure. I'm doing a bit of head calculation to see what year was 6 years ago. So yeah, so
let's call it around
2016. 2016. So 2016, I had just graduated from Yale, and actually, I've always been a materialist, or someone who's found meaning in materials that I use within my work. So maybe I'll just speak a little bit before. I think in undergraduates, I was very much a collagist. So I was taking subway ads off the subway platforms and kind of collaging those into my paintings. I was very much looking at the work of Rauschenberg. When I went to New Haven, Connecticut for graduate school, there were no more subway ads and no more subways. So I had to kind of find other form of material within my surroundings that kind of spoke to me, and I felt like really spoke to the ethos of the work. I found myself making clay paintings because I was doing some research really thinking about myself, my own identity, and how it relates to the world. And came across the claymation cartoon character Gumby of the 1960s and really started working in plastiline clay. So I was melting down blocks of clay into a crock pot and then smearing that or pouring it onto the canvas of the painting. Um, Around that time, I really started getting into the history of monochromatic painting, really started thinking about how that history kind of involved this certain definitions of color that society kind of used, and how those definitions were used to identify or define a group of people, more specifically Black people, as I identify as a Black man. So that kind of led me to working in oil paint because I needed a much broader range if I was going to work in the history of monochromatic painting, but really reference what I like to call tonal painting, which is really
Mm.
expanding notions of color. And so from oil painting, I was really worked there for a while until I found myself in Paris in 2016, 2017, binge watching Neil deGrasse Tyson's A Space Odyssey, and really started thinking about where color comes from. Really fascinated with the experiment by Sir Isaac Newton, where he held a prism to daylight, and through a dispersion of that light, he discovered the palette of the sun, which is the rainbow. And so it's kind of working in these tonal paintings where I found myself kind of came across a puddle of glass in the streets of New York here in the Bronx. And it was kind of glistening in the sunlight. And I was really just fascinated by that material, the luminosity, the flickers of rainbow that were coming off the material. And I thought in some way, shape, or form, I can use this material, and then brought about 2 buckets of it back to my studio. So it was through that kind of walking down the street and find this material that glass became a part of my practice. And from there, I guess I kept searching. I kept thinking about where else does pigment come from? Where else does color come from? And started doing some research on pigments, and then realized that it was from raw natural minerals like red jasper or lapis that the first pigments actually started coming into art history. And so I really started thinking about these raw pigments, the gemstones, and the various kinds of gemstones that they are. And doing like watching a documentary, I saw that gemstones, like quartz specifically, also have a frequency about them. And these frequencies are actually attuned to what color these gemstones are. So it was from thinking about that energy, material quality of the gemstones that I thought that that would be a good uh, aspect to add into my material lexicon. And from there, with the gemstones, acrylic paint, I really started to formulate this, idea or, composition of paintings that are definitely interacting with light, they're interacting with space, and they're interacting with energy.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. You mentioned quite a few things, so I wanna unpack some of that. So let's go ahead and jump to space. You mentioned Neil deGrasse Tyson. You mentioned Space Odyssey, and I think that given recent developments with the James Webb Telescope and other things that have been happening with with NASA and science as it relates to our ability to see more of the universe. Um, Can you talk about why, what really drew you to this as an inspiration, the science, space? What's the real connection that you have with this subject matter?
I guess I've always been interested in space since I was a kid. A huge fan of Star Wars. I really like science fiction. At one point I wanted to be an astronaut when I grew up. I was really horrible at math, so I figured that was never going to fly. Or I wasn't good at school. I'm sure I had other qualities which maybe have, got me in the space camp. Um, but yeah, I think it was kind of watching when as I got older and started watching more documentaries or really educating myself and really just hearing the language between science fiction, or not science fiction, but astrophysics and astrology and astronomy and things of that nature, and even with its relationship to color. I think that's something that really uh, got my attention when they started talking about the spectrum of the sun and how there's billions upon billions of stars in the universe, and how each star has its own color code, and how around multiple many of these stars there's planets, and how many of those planets could very well hold life. At the very least, they have their own perception of color, because the way we see and experience color is through the sun. The sun shines down here on Earth. It illuminates everything that we see. Um, the rays or energy of that color or of that light is actually, absorbed by material here on Earth, like plant life, like animals, like ourselves. And, it influences what the color that we are. And also, um, the way we perceived color is really a product of the environment that we're in. So I always thought to myself that, if I were to stand on another planet in another universe, or another, galaxy with a different star, maybe two stars that were hotter or cooler than our star, what colors would I see? And it was that idea of maybe seeing colors in a context that I haven't seen before, and possibly maybe even a little bit of Afrofuturism of, you know, if I were to stand on another planet, maybe interact with another society of beings, would they perceive me as a black man? Or would they just perceive me as a human being or an alien, a strange creature? I feel like the terms in which we tether to color, some carry political weight, some carry emotional, I feel like are very much um, society constructed. And I feel like because some of these terms have actually been used as psychological warfare to diminish one group of people from another, that if I were to leave this planet, a lot of those microaggressions in relationship to the vastness of the universe would very much just, fall away. They wouldn't hold weight. So these kind of theories or aspects are very much embedded in my work as I make these tonal paintings and find a way to conjure these cosmic landscapes and redefine color for myself.
Thank you. So anyone who follows you on social media will likely know that you have this, I'll call it a ritual of going to museums on a pretty regular basis. And, obviously, people go to museums for different reasons, but as an artist, you're carving out time in your schedule on a regular basis to go and look at art. And can you tell me why that's important to you?
I consider myself a student for life. I never want to stop learning. And I think it's important for especially me as an artist to go to museums, to galleries, out in the world wherever I am, to see art, to really educate myself, and to keep looking and to keep searching. I've seen Monet's water lilies, you know, 100 times in 5 different countries, and maybe 10 different cities, or I've seen Picasso in various countries and cities as well. And I feel like the more I travel and the more I see art, the more I realize that with each place I go to, um, that the way art history is context is different. And I'm really about absorbing as much knowledge about my field as possible. um, you know Oftentimes I find myself in a funk in the studio, and I just like to go to the museum to look at these masterworks, to figure out how to get out of it, how to get out of a sticky situation that I may put myself in within the painting. And it's through that process of continuing to look that I feel, I'm re-inspiring myself every time I go to a museum. You know, I'm thinking of new ideas. I'm being introduced to new artists. I'm stepping into rooms that I might have breezed past the last 2 or 3 times I've been at this museum. New exhibitions are constantly in rotation, especially here in New York City with the multiple art museums that we have. I think if I don't go to a museum once a week, I'm going to miss out on a show. And I find myself in circles with people, who are constantly referencing things. And, honestly, it's just something that I enjoy to do. I love art. I love painting. And, I don't mind, that's where I spend my free time. If I was a musician, I'd probably go listen to music once a week. It's if I was a basketball player, I'd probably I'm watching games while I'm working out. So for me, it's just kind of the same thing. It's my passion, it's my love. So it's something that I just love to do.
And thank you. Can you talk a little bit about some of the artists that you find to be the most influential on to you in your life? And I don't necessarily mean artists whose work you look at as you're making your work, but artists whose either their lives or their history has had an impact on how you think about yourself as an artist.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I look at a lot of artists. I talk to a lot of artists. I have a lot of artists in my circle. I have a lot of mentors who I speak to. Occasionally, um, I would definitely say, Rashid Johnson, Stanley Whitney, the late Jack Whitten, the late Sam Gilliam were all definitely people who, older artists who I look to career-wise for advice. I will continue to look at the careers of, artists like Basquiat, artists like Warhol, who even Jeff Koons, who may have had more of a, broader commercial success. But then I also really enjoy looking at the trajectory of some artists, like like Picasso or de Kooning, and Philip Guston, because I feel like that evolution state that they have within their careers is something that I'm very much interested in. And all of the artists I named have had an evolution. If you look at maybe their early works to the work they're doing now or their late works, there's always been this evolution of growth. And I feel like I'm looking and studying these artists to really figure out what could be maybe some next moves that I could do. Maybe there's some areas within their work that they haven't fully, exposed or exploited yet, that I feel like is in some way in a close proximity to what I'm doing. Industry, you can't do this by yourself. you can't make the work and show the work and sell the work and donate it to a museum and update your website. It's a lot of things that comes along with being an artist. And so it's, I think, starting to change my mind frame, that being like, okay, I have to dedicate a certain amount of my time to just making paintings, and then a certain amount of time throughout the week to going to see museum shows, going to maybe social events to try to connect and interact with collectors, curators, um, gallery owners. It's all important. It's all a part of the process. um, that's maybe speaking specifically to a certain type of artist like myself who shows in galleries. But maybe there's some artists who are more introverts and they don't have that ability. It's not within their personality to go out. Then I think then you may have to find other ways to kind of get your work in front of the right people to get the exposure you want, or the mobility that you want. So that's a little tidbit about some things you could probably do.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk over the years about the professional, sort of like the hyper professionalization, if that's even a word, it's not even a word. How young artists are being thrust into the art market very early in their career before they have an opportunity to even establish the thought process around the kind of work that they want to make. There's sort of like this demand that happens even when they're still in school, right? And so I've been fascinated by that. It's something I've been monitoring for over a decade and sort of seeing that
Mm.
evolve. I mean, for younger artists out there, I mean, you're relatively young, but for artists, even young, like significantly younger than you, do you have any thoughts around how they can sort of pace themselves from, let's say they're in grad school, and again, I'm not assuming that every artist has to go to grad school by any means, but let's just, for the sake of this conversation, they're in grad school and they're about to kind of go out into the quote unquote real world. I mean, any thoughts on how they can approach that? And again, I know you can't be hyper specific because you don't know any particular person's issues, but is patience important? Is relationship building the most important? Like, what are some of the things you think are critically important for very young artists?
I think patience is definitely important. I think connection is important as well. I also think it's really about knowing yourself and what type of artist you want to be, and thinking about, really considering about what type of work you want to make. Because yeah, I think it's a interesting time that we're living in, where a lot of young artists are definitely being, approached during graduate school, and they're still trying to figure out who they are as human beings, and what they want from their work. And I feel like if you are in one of these positions and you are not comfortable with where the work is, but someone's nudging you to show the work, to sell the work, I would just, put those conversations on pause and say, hey, I'm not really interested in, showing or selling right now, but, I would be wondering if we could, put a pause on the exhibition, maybe till next year. And would you be able to help support me via, a residency, or helping me, develop my work via, some materials or some ideas that you really want to get into that maybe, you haven't had the time to. But I think, yeah, you really have to know what you want from this, because just like any other industry where young talent gets swooped up very easily, everyone always has an agenda for you, even if you don't have one for yourself. And so I would really just take the time to figure out at what speed you like to work at. And make sure you're very confident in the work that you're making, that you feel like it's ready to be shown. And for those individuals who, not everyone has the success right out of grad school. Some people, are kind of, let's say, late bloomers, even though their work may be ready, but they're not getting attention. Sometimes it's good just to stay the course, and find a way to keep making it work without the commercial success, because as long as you're dedicated to the work, then other people are going to recognize that dedication and come back to you, and still, if everyone around you is showing and selling and you're not, that doesn't mean it's game over. This is a marathon. It's however old you are, this could be a 70, 80-year career that you're looking at. Art career is one of those phenomenons where people make work up into their old age, or coincidentally, until the day they die. So
Right.
um I think there's room, there's space, there's opportunity for everybody. And I think it's okay to, bench some opportunities to make sure that you're ready with it, because once it's out, it's out. And, there's no way to take back any show that you've already put out there. People are going to, grade you on that work. Not everyone has the, fortunate of being, a Philip Guston, where, you could do abstract today and then switch to, figuration tomorrow. Um, so I think, really, really lead with your heart and follow the passion that's inside of you to, just believe in yourself and, build the career that you want.
Thank you for that. I mean, we're gonna look at some of your work shortly, but I want to just kind of chime in on that because you said so many things that I think were really important. I'm often asked by artists some of these kinds of questions about their career, and you know, I think one of the key things is this concept of it being a marathon, right? And it's easy to say that, of course, because we know a marathon is supposed to be something that takes a long time versus a sprint, right?
Hmm.
Conceptually, but people get sidetracked because they're concerned about their personal economics. They have to eat, they have to pay their bills, etc. And I think that a lot of artists may be at this sort of crossroad where they're thinking, well, if I have some other source of income, then people aren't going to take me serious as an artist, right? Which I don't think is entirely true at all. And I also think that if you look at the history of contemporary or modern art, you'll see that a lot of artists did in fact have other things going on, not just the art making. It's just sort of like a myth that you can just
Hmm.
simply, for 99% of the people, they're not going to have the opportunity to just make art and not do
Hmm.
anything else. But
Right.
if you are in a position where you can just make art and not do anything else, I think you still should take into consideration many of the things that you've said about making sure things are the right fit for you. I think there's a misconception that the only thing artists need to do is make art and sell it, right? There's like, you know, there's so many other things that come along with being a professional artist beyond just making work and selling it. And I think that collectors and patrons out there may often forget that. And you mentioned one of the great things like residency, right? Like artists need a place to make the work, right? They
Hmm.
need career guidance. They may need financial guidance. They may need, frankly, just someone to talk to, right?
There you go.
All all of these things that are connected to their ability to actually make the work. So I know we have some images. I'm going to see if those can get queued up. But while they're queuing those up, I have some other questions. So last week, your exhibition, and these may not necessarily be works from the show that you just opened at Nicola's Gallery in New York City, The Color of Everything. But I want to talk about that show while we look at some of these works. So the Color of Everything. Can you tell me about the title and also share a little bit about some of the works that are in that show?
Yes, the color of everything is really somewhat inspired by this painting, Everything, Everywhere, and More, which is actually in the show at Nicola Vassell Gallery. And the color of everything is really kind of speaking to that sensibility of light that we have in the universe. I feel like it's from that light source of the sun, our star, that really makes everything that we see here on our planet visible. So and all of the colors that we're seeing in nature or in the world is actually a reproduction of that light and that color spectrum. So the color of everything is also, or that idea is also tying in the minerals or the material, the matter that we have here on this planet, and that all of that material that we have here on this planet is actually also comes from the cosmos and is also in some ways the color of it is also a reproduction of that stardust that falls here from Earth, from space. And so it's really kind of think about that theory of everything, the theory of everything, as Stephen Hawking's reference, where everything in the world and the planet and the universe is really connected. In some ways, he was referencing string theory, but I like to expand that with my artistic license to color.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's advance to the next image. So this painting reminds me of so many of the things that you've talked about today. It feels at once very interstellar, but also it feels also very earthy in a way. Like I get both of those things. Um, when you're approaching making your work, are you doing this completely intuitively, or are you mapping things out? What's your sort of process around that?
So when I first think of a painting, there's always a vibe that I'm going for, whether it's something I've seen, walking down the streets of New York, or maybe something I saw, on the internet, or somebody may have referenced. I maybe heard someone say something, and I thought that was just an interesting statement. And so I always kind of start with, a vibe, and then try to translate that into a color palette or a mood. And then from there, I really kind of just intuitively paint the painting. And then in response to the painted surface, which in this painting is actually the warmer tones, those oranges and reds and yellows. And then in response to that, I will paint the glass. And with this, I wanted to go for a bit of a simultaneous contrast, as described by Joseph Albers and the interaction of color. Two colors on opposite ends of the color spectrum are actually placed adjacent to each other, and which actually gives your eye this optical illusion that things are pushing and pulling. So with this, I really wanted to play around with that by having these really vibrant, almost sunset-like palette of the warm tones underneath, but then layer that with these really deep, dark blues and greens that the painted glass is giving. And then within that painting, have it be very much a 50-50 kind of coverage, where the transparent glass is still revealing the underpainting, while the painted glass is actually kind of breaking things up a bit. And actually with this painting, I was really thinking about um, Turner and his
Mm,
skyscapes. I've always
right.
been fascinated with Turner and his skyscapes. Some say seascapes or landscapes, but some of the images that I was really fascinated with when I was in the Tate Britain was that you see the sky and the clouds, and then there'd be just a slither of maybe landscape at the bottom. And there was something very majestic about those clouds. I've always been an admirer of how, technically beautiful these clouds are. And I kind of wanted to get a little aspect of clouds within painting and within this work, which I've been playing around with a few other paintings.
Thank you. Let's advance to the next image. Before we talk about this piece, I want to say thank you for not making all of your works untitled.
Yeah, no.
As a curator,
I have to title the painting.
yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that too. I mean, as a curator, I respect any artist's desire to title their paintings or not title them. But when you're looking at 20 paintings and they're all titled, it makes it really difficult to reference what you saw.
Mm.
But your titles are also quite poetic. So this is called Shibuya on Zen. Well, I know where Shibuya is. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about this title, and then also tell us a little bit about like how you approach this because it seems quite literary and quite poetic.
Hmm. Yeah, so this piece, Shibuya on Zen, actually was one of the first paintings I completed after coming back from Japan. And, before going to Japan, I'm a big fan of this Kanye song, "Life of the Party," which features Andre 3000. And within that song, he stays straight from Shibuya on some Zen, we on 10. And it wasn't until I found myself in Shibuya and just vibing that I realized oh shit, Kanye was talking about this place. I wouldn't have known that unless I was in Tokyo or had been to Tokyo. I don't even know if most
Right, right,
people realize where Shibuya, when he says that line, like where Shibuya is.
right,
And I felt like that was a very privileged thing to say, and he could have easily mentioned, South Side Chicago,
right,
or LA or Hollywood or something like that. But as a Black American, to say, I'm on Shibuya, I think that a lot of people, it went over a lot of people's heads if you've never been to Shibuya or if you're not, you're
right,
not
right,
familiar. But I think I found myself, um, in Shibuya, really enjoying the culture. It was, I got there like the tail end of, cherry blossom season. So it was literally like the last 2 days of it that I saw some glimpses of the, cherry blossoms. And I felt like I found myself so at peace, or a sense of comfort, and surrounded by, or just filled with an abundance of positivity from that whole experience of being in Japan, that I just wanted to come back and kind of make a painting that was dedicated to that moment. And so that's where this painting came from. And, definitely referencing a cherry blossom, palette. Also, I saw, the Damien Hirst show is also on at the National Gallery in Tokyo. And so that was just full of cherry blossoms. So I was very inspired by that show as well. But then at the same time, I was looking at images from, the Hubble telescope. And, so this painting is definitely kind of referencing a solar system or multiple galaxies or universes within one image with these agate slices. So, um, a couple layers of inspiration. Um, Visually were definitely referenced, but also experientially and spiritually. So, I've considered myself to be a spiritual being. I'm not religious, but I did visit a few Zen temples while I was in Tokyo as well, and really enjoyed that experience.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. For those who don't know about Shibuya, it's quite an interesting neighborhood in Tokyo. We won't spend much more time on it, but you know, if you're able to travel to Japan and you find yourself in Tokyo, you definitely want to go there for reasons
Definitely
explained.
want to hit
Um,
Shibuya.
for
Yeah.
reasons, um, so let's advance to the next image. So it's a bit of a darker work, almost similar to, or is this the work behind you? This is the work behind you.
This is the work behind me. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you know, that's kind of like meta, right? So anyway, let's we could just spend a moment on this piece. I mean, you may have already shared some of the more tactile material aspects of these works and how they're created. But if there's anything you'd like to share, I think for me, what stands out also is the title of this work is "Black as a Rainbow." So people don't even think about rainbows as it relates to the color black. So maybe we can spend a moment on that.
Yeah, Black as a Rainbow is very much inspired by a show that was going to be put on by curator Charles Moore, which didn't happen. But I was already had already had a history of working in the um, thinking about the color black. Well, actually, while I was in Paris, I did a whole series called Blackness is Beautiful. And it was through that series I was really thinking about the history of the color black or black paintings, monochromatic black paintings, back to Paul Below, to Malevich, to Frank Stella, to Ad Reinhardt, and really wanted, and was really thinking about the language that was behind all of these works, where it was kind of describing black as a void, within Paul Below's work. The caption was in French, Negroes fighting in a tunnel at night. And for myself, I, you know, related to color black predominantly to, a sense of identity. And so I wanted to kind of redefine or recontextualize the color black for myself. So I started making a series of paintings, which were dark tonal paintings, but they weren't made with the color black as you may go to the art store and get, carbon black or ivory black. And I was really just taking blues, greens, earth tones, violets, and kind of mixing them down to a very dark palette, and then applying that on the canvas and really allowing the viewer to see the nuance of color. Maybe at a distance, you're seeing this, just purely black painting. But once you get up close, you actually start seeing like, oh, there's actually, a variety of colors. So for me, I think on a technical basis, I kind of saw black as the amalgamation of all colors, kind of coming together. And I also thought about that in my relationship to, my own personal narrative. I feel like the way society or social structures kind of define us, when I kind of think about it as like, when I was born, before my mother gave me my name, the nurse probably looked at me and said, "Oh, look at that cute black baby." And so my identity as a black person was already deemed or defined within society before my mother gave me my name. And I think that every black person has their own personal experience. Everybody on this planet has their own personal experience, has their own personal history, and that diversity or vastness of different experiences, it doesn't make you a singularity. It doesn't necessarily you shouldn't be defined just by this color or by the constructs of society. So I kind of see myself as just this beautiful black rainbow, and as definitely a person of color who has been to Shibuya. I've been to Paris. I've experienced things. I've seen things. Which may definitely separates me from another Black person, whatever, and they however they define themselves. So I think as Black as a rainbow, I just wanted to kind of use that this somewhat poetic title to kind of conjure the ideas or different ways of one thinking about the color Black, but then also thinking about the palette in which a rainbow could be seen.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's advance to the next image. We're coming down to the final few minutes, and I do have a couple more questions. So I'm glad that this is the next work because the shape of these canvases and how they're put together is something that I think you kind of become a bit like, I wouldn't say known for. That's probably not the right word, but what led you to this approach of stacking and juxtaposing canvases?
As a student of abstraction and abstract painting, I've always been interested in shapes. And I guess more of a postmodern aesthetic of thinking about our history is, there's a history of shape painters. Stella's definitely a part of that. Sam Gilliam, Ellsworth Kelly, Elizabeth Murray, Harvey Quaitman. There's, a long history of shaped canvas painters. And I always wanted to engage in that history. And it actually started in Paris where I was taking these squares and really thinking about the Tetris format and kind of adding these four squares together to kind of make an interesting shape. And so from that, the idea kind of evolved where I was just playing around more and more with, these various squares to make a shape because I felt like, modern abstraction came out of the square format. And so
Mhm.
I wanted to make a riff off that symmetry by making shapes that felt somewhat, off kilter in a sense. So, yeah, this shape, the first time I made it was for a show I did last year, and the painting was called Horizon Convergence. And this piece is actually small on your screen right now, but when you're in person, it's actually 13 feet by 8 feet high. So it kind of has this very much I'd say very abex reference in terms of scale, but it's also I wanted to make a painting that felt more cinematic. It felt more
Mhm.
widescreen, and that it kind of took the viewer and myself on this journey. That I wasn't just kind of locked into one frame like this. The square is behind me, but also that in some ways that the plane needed to be extended, that it needed to be stretched out a little bit just to kind of fit all of it in, and also give some reference that, with these maybe negative spaces, that there's more to be seen. And so I think within that is what's really leading me to kind of play around with these shapes. I find it very interesting to try to work with these various corners and things like that. It kind of gives me a challenge within the studio to kind of solve the puzzle or solve the problem, because it's not a square. It's not a very easy shape to make a painting in. um but yeah, it's fun and it keeps me guessing. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah. So we're coming down to the final couple of minutes. We did have a question come in. I'm going to run this question by you, and it'll be the final question. The question is, how is your work a consistent practice of vulnerability, especially as a Black man? Well, I mean, one, I just want to put an asterisk on that. I mean, they're asking, how is your work a consistent practice of vulnerability? But I think it might be like, is your work a consistent practice of vulnerability, especially as a Black man?
I think just as an artist, I'm constantly asking myself questions about, who I am and why I make the work that I'm making. And I feel like the work really allows me to ponder those questions, especially because they're abstract paintings on a very internal level. You know, I don't, when people look at my work, I don't necessarily think that they, if I wasn't in a room, they didn't know who Alteronce Gumby was, that they would look at my work and necessarily think that they're experiencing the work of a Black person. I think that's the beauty of abstract painting, or even art in general. So um, I think maybe that aspect of, you know, vulnerability really comes in on a personal level, on how I'm thinking in my studio. And I don't think every painting I make is necessarily speaking to that. I don't think I have to uh, wake up and make a painting and say like, oh, what, you know, sense of vulnerability am I putting on the canvas today? I just
Right.
think me making a painting and displaying it into a world is vulnerable enough. You know, I'm opening myself to criticism from all angles. So uh, you know, there's many forms of being vulnerable or showing that vulnerability. Um, you know, I have other interests in things going on in my work besides that.
Right. Well, thank you for answering that question. Thank you for being here today. We've come to the end of our conversation, my friend. I will be seeing you in New York in a few weeks, maybe sooner than
Wonderful.
that. Uh, Thanks so much for your generosity and your patience today. And I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm going to move on to final words, Alterance, and I'll be seeing you soon. Um, the Gantt
Right.
Center's goal is to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt Center to expand its reach and further develop programs like Open Air. To learn more about the ways you can support the Gantt Center, please visit their website at ganttcenter.org/donate. Also, be sure to click the subscribe button below the screen to be updated on all future virtual programs. We thank you all for joining us for this great conversation, and we look forward to next month's Open Air with artist Philip Thomas. Have a good night and stay safe.